I'm off on a trip overseas with my mistress, sold the house for $400,000. The overly cheerful voice of my husband, John, made me instinctively ask, "What?" He called from the hospital, saying he sold the house for $400,000. What does that mean? That house was precious to me, inherited from my dad. And to openly declare he has a mistress, this is madness. What are you talking about? What about Whitney if you sold the house? As soon as I mentioned our daughter's name, John scoffed. That brat. I've always found her annoying. Acting all high and mighty. Of course, I'm leaving her behind. Such words about his own daughter. I was furious and shocked to hear he sold our house and plans to flee with his mistress. I must somehow stop John. Even if he says he sold the house, it can't be transferred that quickly. I have to do something. My name is Vivian. A 39-year-old housewife. I wish I could say I live happily with my husband John, a year older than me, and our 9-year-old daughter, Whitney. But our relationship with John is far from harmonious. Since our marriage, John's personality has gradually twisted, and I've been suspecting his infidelity for a year now. Without proof, I've been unable to act, and John doesn't seem to hide his cheating. John works at a factory for a parts manufacturer and goes out drinking 4 or 5 nights a week after work. It's possible he's out with work colleagues, but he didn't go out this often until a year ago. Moreover, John comes home smelling of unique perfumes and preparing luxury bags and shoes I've never seen as gifts. Of course, he never gives them to me, often leaving the house with them. I'm too scared to confront him about his infidelity, cowardly waiting for concrete evidence. He's a different person from the John I met. We met 10 years ago, dated for a year, and then got married. I was drawn to his kindness and gentlemanly manner, and before I knew it, I was in love. We got engaged on our first anniversary and married, with Whitney born soon after. It seemed like a happy marriage from the outside. But why has it come to this? It all started when Whitney turned 1. As Whitney turned 1 and became more active than ever, rummaging around the house, parenting became increasingly challenging. As a housewife, I was with Whitney all day long, but sometimes it was too much for me alone, and I started asking John, after work, to help with baths and meals. Initially, perhaps due to a sense of paternal duty, John helped as I asked. But as the days went on, he seemed to grow resentful and stopped engaging in childcare. I've been thinking, isn't this your job? You're the housewife, so you should be able to handle childcare alone. Why should I, tired from work, have to help? John's frustration exploded with those harsh words, and after throwing them at me, he left Whitney and me in the living room, quickly retreating to the bedroom alone. I tried to calm Whitney, now in the terrible twos and throwing tantrums even over getting into pajamas, while John's words painfully stabbed my heart. Afterward, John completely disengaged from Whitney. Even on his days off, when Whitney asked, "Daddy, let's play," John would respond, "Playing is Mommy's job. I'm busy," while reading a magazine. He never tried to understand Whitney's feelings. When Whitney cried, he would snap, "Hey, don't cry over this. What kind of parenting is Vivian doing? A housewife who can't even handle childcare, how incompetent." Glaring at both Whitney and me. I didn't want Whitney to hear John's verbal abuse, so we retreated to our room, forced to play together. There were times I wanted to enjoy my hobbies, like reading or watching movies. But living constantly with Whitney left me with virtually no personal time. Yet John enjoyed his hobbies while I endured his verbal abuse. It was so unfair. However, our household depended on John's income, so I couldn't complain. Without John, I couldn't provide for Whitney alone. I was angry at my own helplessness. So, John lived carelessly, indifferent to parenting. 8 years have passed since then, and Whitney is now 9. John's verbal abuse continues unabated, and the kind John I knew before our marriage is nowhere to be seen. I lived with John solely to support Whitney, avoiding provoking him as much as possible. "Mom, you're so good at drawing, you should do it as a job." One day, while drawing together, Whitney suddenly said that. "Do art as a job?" "Yeah. Your drawings are so kind and wonderful." Whitney smiled brightly, looking at the animal illustrations I had drawn. I've always loved drawing and even once aspired to be among the artists. Although I realized halfway that it was impossible and gave up, I still drew illustrations as a hobby. "I always show your drawings to my friends and brag about them. They all say they're amazing. I'm envious of Mom being able to draw like that." Despite having a twisted dad like John, Whitney grew up honest and straightforward. She's cheerful, the complete opposite of my introverted self. She seems to have many friends at school and is favored by her teacher. I felt so proud when Whitney complimented my painting. Knowing Whitney was watching me gave me confidence. "Thank you. I'm so happy." When I said that, Whitney's smile bloomed like a flower. If Whitney can smile, I feel like I can keep going in this life. I quietly thought to myself. That night, John came home drunk as usual, stumbling into the living room as soon as he arrived. He was completely intoxicated. His drinking had been getting worse lately, to the point of concern. Sighing, I peeled off his jacket and checked his pockets. "What's this?" Usually, there's nothing but keys in his pockets, but this time, a piece of paper caught my eye. It was a receipt with what seemed to be a hotel's name on it. This is definitely proof of cheating. I had suspected his infidelity, but now I had physical evidence. Trying to calm my fluttering heart, I carefully tucked the receipt away on a shelf. I started thinking about how to confront John. The next day, still half drunk, John left the house. After Whitney went to school, I did the usual household chores, but I couldn't stop thinking about the receipt. I had suspected John's cheating, and not confronting him was my choice. But now, with solid evidence, it's hard to continue this false marriage. Within a week, or maybe even a few days, I want to make him admit his affair and apologize. How should I? As I was thinking, my mobile phone vibrated. Who could it be at this time? It's rare to get a call during the day. Checking the phone, it was an unknown number. A sense of foreboding, I answered. "Hello, is this Mrs. John Simmons?" "Yes, speaking." "Who's this?" "This is North Hospital. Mr. Simmons has been." The call was from the largest general hospital around. The hospital informed me that John had been brought in by ambulance, undergoing surgery for a kidney disease. They also said that his kidney is likely to fail and will need a transplant. Confused by this sudden news, the doctor asked if I was okay. "Yes, a kidney transplant is possible, right?" "Yes. We'll start looking for a donor, and if we find a match, we can proceed with the transplant surgery." Although my mind was in chaos hearing that John needed a kidney transplant, the doctor continued to explain about the surgery. "We'll check the compatibility with potential donors, so please cooperate." I only half understood what the doctor was saying, but I knew John was seriously ill. Despite John belittling me and having affairs, I don't wish him dead. I hope he can be saved. That day, I spent the whole night thinking about John's transplant surgery. Weeks passed, and we found out the compatibility results for potential kidney donors, primarily within the family. Surprisingly, I was the best match. John's parents are alive but in poor health, unable to undergo such a surgery. Being an only child and the healthiest, I, with the same blood type as John, was the best choice. It would be a lie to say I had no doubts. But John's life is irreplaceable. With that thought, I decided to be the donor for John's kidney transplant. When I explained John's condition and our transplant surgery to Whitney, "Got it. Take care," she cheerfully said. During my hospitalization, Whitney would stay with John's parents. They're in poor health but capable enough to care for themselves at home. Whitney, close with her grandparents, was happy to go to Grandpa and Grandma's house. This should be fine for a while. It was a relief that Whitney is such a well-behaved child. With that assurance, I went through with the transplant surgery. A week later, after signing the consent form and undergoing health checks, I underwent the kidney transplant for John. The surgery was quicker than I expected, and I stayed in the hospital for about a week, John for 10 days. Fortunately, there were no complications, and our recovery was smooth. The day before my discharge, my mobile phone rang again. Wondering who it could be this time, I answered. "It's me," a familiar voice said suddenly, startling me. It was John. Thinking he might be thanking me for being a donor, I asked, "It's been a while. How are you feeling after the surgery?" I expected him to say something like, "I'm better thanks to you, Vivian." "Thank you." But his reply was unexpected. "About our house." John paused, then continued. Suddenly, he brought up the topic of the house, and I was thrown into disarray. "I sold it for $400,000 and am going on a trip abroad with my mistress, Alexandra." His voice was inappropriately cheerful, and I instinctively asked, "What?" He called from the hospital to say, "I sold the house for $400,000? What does that mean?" That house was precious to me, inherited from my dad. And to openly declare he has a mistress, this is madness. "What are you talking about? What about Whitney if you sold the house?" As soon as I mentioned our daughter's name, John scoffed. "That brat. I've always found her annoying. Acting all high and mighty. Of course, I'm leaving her behind." What a way to talk about his own daughter. I was furious and shocked to hear he sold our house and plans to flee with his mistress, Alexandra. I must somehow stop John. Even if he says he sold the house, it can't be transferred that quickly. I have to do something. After John said, "I sold the house. Going on an overseas trip with Alexandra." The phone call abruptly ended. Confused, I tried to make sense of what had happened. But no matter how much I thought about it, I just couldn't believe he sold the house suddenly, especially while I was in the hospital. Shocked, my condition worsened and my hospital stay was extended by a few days. In my despair, I lay in bed alone, helplessly pondering the future. First, I should call Whitney. Without the house, Whitney and I have nowhere to return. It was infuriating enough that John boldly declared he has a mistress, but my primary concern was Whitney. I called my in-laws' house, and my mother-in-law, Yasmin, answered. She quickly handed the phone to Whitney. "Hello, Whitney? I'm sorry, looks like Mom's hospital stay got extended. Are you okay? Not too lonely? Also, I heard Dad sold the house. We have nowhere to go back to, right?" Worried, I bombarded her with questions. Then Whitney replied cheerfully, "Mom, it's okay. I've taken care of it." Taken care of it? Confused by her words, I was puzzled. Dad said he asked his mistress to sell the house, but actually, Grandpa and Grandma. Whitney detailed the events that had transpired during my hospitalization. I was stunned by the unexpected turn of events that had unfolded without my knowledge. "So, Mom, rest easy. I'm fine." "Thank you." Encouraged by Whitney's responsible words, I was finally able to calm down a bit. But if Whitney's story was true, what had become of John and Alexandra by now? Curious, I reminded myself that rest was crucial and drifted off to sleep. 3 days later, fully recovered, I was discharged and headed to my in-laws' house. "Mom, welcome back!" Whitney ran up to me with a joyful face. Yasmin was smiling behind her. "I'm glad for you." "And John, he really did something unbelievable." "I'm sorry, Vivian." My father-in-law, Kevin, apologized with a grim face. Despite having such wonderful parents, how did John end up so twisted? "No, it's my fault for following along without saying anything." "Please don't apologize." "Thank you." "And, well, Vivian, there's something we need to tell you." "Yes? What is it?" I sat down with Kevin and Yasmin, listening to their story with Whitney by my side. Though surprised again by their news, Yasmin's firm encouragement, "We won't let John have his way," reassured me. After hearing from Kevin and Yasmin, I was about to head home with Whitney when, passing a real estate agency, I noticed a familiar man and an unfamiliar woman arguing with an agent. It was unmistakably John. And the woman with him must be Alexandra. John was in a tracksuit with messy hair, and Alexandra wore a short skirt with only one high heel, no makeup. "Hey! What do you mean the house can't be sold?" "Yeah! What about my $400,000? "Well, the buyer canceled the purchase last night, so the contract is no longer valid." "Huh? Why cancel? Damn it!" Seeing John stamping his feet and Alexandra shrieking at his side, passers-by turned their gaze in surprise. Whitney and I were also shocked, but realizing it was about us, we approached them. "What are you doing here?" Startled by my sudden voice, Alexandra let out a ridiculous, "Huh?" upon recognizing me. "What are you doing here?" "Ah, I get it. You're behind this, aren't you? You must have convinced the buyer not to go through with it." "Huh? This is unbelievable. What are you even talking about?" As John and Alexandra hurled insults, I subtly moved Whitney behind me to protect her. Confused, the real estate agent listened as I introduced myself as his wife. The agent responded with a bewildered, "Ah. Are you kidding me about the cancellation? Because of you, we had to turn back right before boarding the plane, and now we can't buy a new house. I even have debts from the money I spent on her." John pointed at his mistress as he said her. "I see." Finally, I understood John's intentions. John had tried to sell the house, which I had inherited from my late father, to pay off debts incurred from his spending on Alexandra and to buy a new place for them to live. Such selfishness. Ignoring Whitney and me, he even tried to take away my most valuable asset. I was shaking with anger. "Excuse me, but aren't you the one being disrespectful? Coming out of nowhere and talking back to me? As if you could survive without me." Despite the dire situation, John's continued insults were appalling. "First off, did you really think you could sell my precious house without discussing it with me? I'm the owner. Did you forge the documents or something? And you've been bad-mouthing the home buyer, but that buyer was your own parents." "Huh? What do you mean?" Indeed. What Whitney had told me on the phone while I was hospitalized was that Kevin and Yasmin had pretended to buy my house as a plan to teach John a lesson. Having heard everything about John's misdeeds from Whitney, they were furious, saying, "How could he do this to Vivian and our sweet granddaughter?" Whitney's bright and honest nature had made her grandparents believe her over their son. "Let me explain. Grandpa and Grandma got really mad when they found out about Dad and that woman. I knew Dad was trying to sell the house, so I talked to them. They said they wouldn't let it be sold so easily since it's a special house Dad left for Mom. So, before someone else bought it, they intentionally made a bid to buy it. Whitney stepped forward and boldly explained the situation. Those guys, my own parents, doing this to me. Old parents. And you too, acting all high and mighty, just kids. Shows how badly Mom raised you. John sneered crudely. Undeterred by John's attack, Whitney stood firm. I pulled out a piece of paper from my bag and thrust it in front of John's nose. Sorry, but we're getting divorced. John laughed through his nose at the sight of the divorce papers. Divorce? You said it, right? You're okay with divorcing? You think you can survive without me? John must think that as a housewife, I'll be lost if we divorce. Indeed, that might have been the case before. But now, I had a secret plan. To shatter John's shallow thinking, I spoke up. Don't worry. I've received a gift from your parents while they're still alive. Huh? A living gift? What's that? John and his mistress looked bewildered. This morning, Kevin and Yasmin told me they wanted to give me part of their assets while they were still alive. Their health was failing, and they weren't sure how much longer they had. Of course, I initially refused, suggesting they should give it to John. But Kevin and Yasmin insisted. We value Vivian, who gave us a lovely granddaughter, more than a son who can't even thank her for donating an organ. I expressed my gratitude and agreed to accept their living gift. It's your dad and Mom's wish. They said they wanted to give it to me, not you. John's face turned pale. Understandably so. He was losing the assets that should have been his to a wife he was divorcing. That's dirty. That's not right. It's normal for children to inherit their parents' assets. I'll talk to them now. If they won't listen, I'll take it to court. John glared at me with fiery eyes, shouting. I sighed at John's endlessly shallow thoughts. Maybe it's time to deliver the final blow. Stepping forward, I locked eyes with John and declared, You're talking nonsense. It all started with you, belittling me and even having a mistress, right? You're the one who spent the money. Kevin and Yasmin's decision is only natural. And do you even have the money to sue? Even if you did, how would your betrayals play out in court? A scream escaped John's lips. He trembled at the sight of me, now looking like a demon. Sorry, I won't sue. Please forgive me. His apology was desperate, but it was too late. I glared at John once more and delivered my final words. I'll make sure you pay for insulting Whitney and me, alimony and child support, all of it. If you can't pay, I'll chase you to the depths of hell. Be prepared. John and Alexandra screamed and ran away. The real estate agent, who had witnessed everything. Thank you, he said with a relieved posture. No, I'm the one who should apologize for causing you trouble. With those words, I quickly left with Whitney, heading back home. Mom, you were so cool. Thank you, Whitney, for fighting for Mom. Despite the situation, Whitney's face was lit with a smile. I vowed in my heart to protect her for a lifetime. A few days later, I was able to successfully divorce John. It felt surreal that my long-endured marriage ended so easily with just a piece of paper. I wondered why I had tolerated it all for so long. John, having squandered his money on Alexandra, had to take out a loan to pay the alimony. Alexandra left him, saying, I can't be with such a poor man anymore. To add to his misfortune, John's company faced a sales decline due to material shortages and had to cut labor costs. Working in the factory, John was one of the first to be laid off. It's unfortunate, but I can't help but think there was a reason for his layoff. Probably, those with poor performance and behavior were the first to go. John, who acted arrogantly at home, must have behaved similarly with his subordinates at work. Now, having lost his job, wife, and lover, John is barely making ends meet with part-time work. Without the energy to job hunt, he's settling for part-time jobs that allow him to work and rest at his leisure, probably leading a bleak life. But I couldn't muster any sympathy for him. I gave John a part of my kidney and did everything I could. Yet, he ridiculed me, and it seems like karma has caught up with him. He can sweat it out just to pay off his debts. As for me, I started working on illustrations. Inspired by Whitney's compliment about my drawing skills. While the orders are still few, my customers praise my work as meticulous and skilled. I am determined to increase my clientele and provide a good life for Whitney. One day at the airport, on my way back from work, I ran into an old classmate. It was Donald, a guy who had made my life miserable from middle school through high school. Because of Donald, I was pushed to the point of dropping out of high school. His personality hadn't changed even as an adult. Upon seeing me, he immediately demeaned me as the dropout loser. I almost lost it at that moment, but I managed to control my anger and walked away. Later, Donald and I would run into each other again at the airport. "Hey, dropout, this is what an airplane looks like," he said with a malicious smile. When it was revealed that I was the captain, his reaction made me surprised. "My name is Brian, a 38-year-old bachelor." Saying I'm a pilot might make it sound like I followed a path of elite success, but in reality, I dropped out of high school once. I had been subjected to insidious bullying from middle to high school. The start of it all was a fallout with a classmate, Donald. Donald was outgoing, friendly, and popular with everyone. In contrast, my only merit was being serious, and while I did okay in studies, I was bad at socializing. So when Donald, who had been on the same soccer team in elementary and joined the soccer club with me, approached me early on, I was overjoyed. The initial connection was our shared history with soccer. In our group, I was always the butt of the jokes. My inability to deflect the teasing only served as more fodder for Donald's charm and, simultaneously, his cruelty. Initially, I preferred being teased over being alone, accepting my place in the group. I even found joy in making others laugh with my reactions. However, the dynamics slowly began to distort. The way laughter was garnered in the group gradually escalated. At first, I rationalized it as part of friendship dynamics. But perhaps my laughter encouraged it. The jokes gradually turned into blatant mockery and personal attacks. Sometimes, they would half-jokingly apply wrestling moves on me. "Stop it," I would say with a laugh, but no one would ever stop Donald. Instead, everyone laughed while watching us, making me realize I wasn't entertaining them, I was the entertainment. He was just enjoying humiliating me. After that realization, being part of the group became a torment. The teasing I had once brushed off laughingly became unbearable. Walking down the hallway one day, I was smacked on the head as usual. Normally, I'd just laugh it off saying, "What's that for?" But that day, "Stop it," I clearly told him. Then, "What's with you? You're not fun anymore." He made a displeased face and said, "Just because you're in the group doesn't mean you can't look like you're enjoying it." "It's impossible. I'm not having fun." "Huh. What's that supposed to mean? You were always laughing. And who do you think you are, Brian, acting all high and mighty?" he said in a low, intimidating voice, glaring at me. I glared back at him without backing down. He said, "Whatever," and walked away, quickly blending back into the group. From the next day, my life turned into hell. Arriving at school in the morning, Not only Donald and the members he incited, but even unrelated classmates began to ignore me. Being ignored was still bearable, but soon they started actively harassing me. He was always the ringleader. At first, I stubbornly continued showing up at school and club activities, but eventually, the pain became too much to bear, and I started missing them. Entering the 9th grade, the stress of exams coupled with their behavior became even more vicious. Having missed nearly half of the 9th grade, my grades inevitably plummeted. I had been considered a candidate for one of the top high schools in the county back in the 8th grade, but now I found myself in a situation where I could only aim for schools 2 or 3 tiers lower. Still, I thought I could escape this situation by graduating middle school, so I tried to focus on my studies. But, as expected, I couldn't concentrate, and worst of all, I ended up going to the same high school as Donald. Up until middle school, Mr. Richard, a teacher, had taken a personal interest in helping me out, scolding Donald and the others, which made things somewhat bearable. The hell continued into high school. Trying to establish new relationships in high school, I ended up in the same class as Donald. "Hey, there's Brian," Donald declared, grabbing my collar in front of everyone as I walked into the classroom. "Let's all tease him. He loved being teased by everyone in middle school, right?" The classmates initially seemed skeptical, but once they decided I was someone they could disdain, they became endlessly cruel, characteristic of kids this age. Unlike in middle school, there was no teacher willing to protect me. Eventually, my spirit broke, and before I knew it, I couldn't bring myself to go to school anymore. Failing to meet the attendance requirements, I was held back a year, which led to me dropping out of high school. The one who tried to save me was Mr. Richard, my middle school teacher. He was the only teacher who noticed my situation and reached out to me. Not only did he scold Donald and the others, but during the exam period, he let me use his room as a refuge to escape from them. After school, I used to head to his room every day to vent my frustrations. During the 9th grade, when my attendance dropped and I fell behind in studies, he tutored me closely. Unfortunately, despite Mr. Richard's efforts, Donald and his crew's behavior never changed, but I believe he did everything he could. He was my only ally and support at school. Just having him there was like what got me through middle school. Mr. Richard, who was always concerned about me, kept in touch through letters even after graduation. But after continuing to face the same treatment in high school and losing the will to attend, I couldn't bring myself to reply to his letters. One day, he came to my house to apologize in person. "I'm really sorry, I couldn't be there for you when you needed it," he said. When Mr. Richard found out I had stopped going to high school, he brought over loads of information about correspondence high schools and night schools. "Why not start over in a new environment?" "It's useless. I'm useless." My self-esteem was damaged to the limit by being ridiculed repeatedly by Donald and the others. Mr. Richard encouraged me, saying, "Brian, you'll be fine. You'll get what you deserve if the environment changes." Driven by his passion, I began studying for the GED program through distance learning. I never really hated studying, and with the active support from my parents and Mr. Richard, my studies progressed unbelievably well. Frustrated with myself for breaking under harassment, I refused to let those guys ruin my life and immersed myself in my studies. At that time, my parents, noticing my hard work but also cautioning against overdoing it, took me on a trip for a break. That was when I first boarded an airplane. What surprised me first was the imposing presence of the aircraft before boarding. I remembered how I used to love looking at vehicles in encyclopedias as a kid, especially aircraft. Then, flying in the sky, I was completely captivated by the world above. The gradually receding view of the city, the thrill of breaking through clouds, and the clear skies beyond. The beauty seen from the airplane's window made me feel freed from everything. It was a refreshing view that seemed to erase all the entanglements and regrets over my past failures. "I want to fly freely in the sky. I want to be a pilot." This vague idea became a solid determination by the time we returned from the trip. It was the first time I had a dream, and I felt my heart leap for the first time in a while. Becoming a pilot is not an easy path. It would be a burden on my parents. But I didn't want to give up on something again. While I was struggling with these thoughts, Mr. Richard visited me again. "Look at you, Brian, you seem a lot happier." He noticed my change immediately. "How's your study going?" "It's going really well lately. I've found a goal." He looked at me encouragingly. I feared being laughed at, or being told it was impossible for me. For a moment, such thoughts crossed my mind, but then I reminded myself that Mr. Richard would never do that. And then, I gathered my courage and spoke up. "I've thought about becoming a pilot." Mr. Richard's eyes widened, tears welling up in them. Seeing his face light up with joy almost made me cry too. "That's great. I'll support you. Finding a goal is a wonderful thing. Go for it," he said with a trembling voice, taking my hand. His words solidified my resolve. After that, I talked to my parents about wanting to become a pilot. My mother, Karen, looked a bit worried, but my father, Thomas, said, "That's great. I thought you've been looking more determined lately, so this was the reason. I'll support you with all I have." Then, "Yes, we will." My mother nodded. Afterward, I studied hard, passed the GED program and the aviation school exams. I worked diligently on my studies and training in aviation school and finally obtained my pilot's license. But I wasn't satisfied just yet. Aiming to be a better pilot, I won a recommendation for graduate school, where I studied cutting-edge aviation. The thesis I wrote there received higher praise than I had expected, paving the way for my doctoral studies. After earning my doctorate, I finally felt a sense of accomplishment. Though I considered staying abroad for work, I decided to return home for my parents waiting in my hometown. Back home, I got a job as a pilot with an airline company. One day, while walking to the airport exit in my casual clothes, a man in dirty overalls called out to me. I recognized his face immediately, and was struck speechless. It was Donald, unforgettable, who had made my middle and high school years hell. "Look who it is, long time no see. The dropout loser who quit high school. What are you doing here? Guess you're a janitor or something. Got anything to say, dropout Brian?" I was traumatized, forgetting where I was as my mind went blank. His tone, attitude, and expression. It brought back memories of those hellish school days. Amused by my frozen state, Donald mentioned he was working here as a mechanic. He seemed to think I was a janitor or something, his attitude clearly dismissive. There seemed to be no remorse for nearly crushing a person. "You have no idea the pain you caused me." I almost lost my composure but managed to hold back my anger and simply said, "Well then, good luck," and quickly left the scene. Even after Donald was out of sight, my heart continued to beat uncomfortably for a while. Later, as the shock of that encounter began to fade, I received a call from a familiar person. It was Mr. Richard. Apparently, hearing about my achievements, Mr. Richard decided it wasn't too late to pursue his dream of graduate studies and had finally been accepted into a prestigious university in England. When I was genuinely happy for him. "There's something I'd like to ask you," he said. "I'll be flying to England, and I'd love to be on a plane piloted by you." Of course. I readily agreed, and then did everything I could to secure the pilot's seat for Mr. Richard's flight. The day of departure arrived. It was very cold, and I was walking around the aircraft for an external check, wearing a jacket over my captain's uniform. Then, I encountered Donald again. Everyone was at their posts, leaving him and me alone. Seeing me, Donald laughed and pretended to hit me with a tool. I flinched, and he said, "What, got scared? It's just a joke," with the same immaturity as before. "Hey, dropout, this is what an airplane looks like." Donald sneered openly, when a voice called from behind me. "Captain!" It was Susan, one of the cabin attendants. "Captain?" Donald looked confused, But Susan called out to me directly. "Captain, it's time for the flight. Please prepare." Understood. I'll be right there. Leaving a stunned Donald behind, I quickly made my way to Susan. Donald clicked his tongue behind me, but I felt a sense of vindication, almost like I had won something. Soon it was time to board, and the passengers began to enter the plane one by one. Seeing Mr. Richard among them made me smile involuntarily. Soon, all the passengers were seated, and the hatch was sealed. As the captain, I introduced myself and promised a safe journey through the skies to all passengers. I was sure Mr. Richard could hear my voice too. Thinking this made me feel even prouder to be piloting as a captain. Donald was a thing of the past. I can't forget the humiliation, but I'm not the same person I was back then. Reminding myself of this, I prepared to take off. The plane took off without a hitch. But then, an unexpected event occurred. A message from the control tower informed us of a sudden change in weather. Almost immediately, the plane was hit by a terrible storm. The aircraft shook violently in the blowing wind. It was an extraordinary shaking, unlike anything normal. Panic ensued inside, and amidst the chaos of reports coming through my headphones, I felt a moment of confusion. But I haven't accumulated over 10 years of experience for nothing. Plus, this situation closely resembled something I had written about in my thesis. Calm down. It's okay. I can do this, after all the hard work I've put in. I collaborated with the co-pilot and cabin crew to ensure the aircraft's safety and to calm the panic. Soon, we managed to escape the dire situation. The aircraft gradually stabilized. When we safely landed and saw the airport, I felt a wave of relief, but the job wasn't done yet. As the captain, I apologized for the incident and then wished all passengers and crew success in their future endeavors before finishing my duties. Of course, the image of one particular mentor crossed my mind. Later, the details of the malfunction that had troubled the aircraft were revealed. It turned out that a certain part was damaged. Despite thorough double checks, I wondered why the maintenance had been neglected. When the authorities analyzed the camera footage, it was revealed to be Donald's doing. The malfunction was intentional. Initially denying the accusations, Donald's face flushed the moment I appeared. Noticing something was off, everyone turned their gaze towards me. I summarized my relationship with Donald. "It's all in the past. How long will you hold on to it? That's why you're foolish." My impromptu remark seemed to make Donald realize he had dug his own grave. He tried to deny it hastily, but it was too late. The gaze of everyone present turned towards Donald. I'm not the timid person I used to be. Looking Donald in the eye, I made it clear. The one who's been holding on to the past is you. You intended this as harassment against me, but do you realize how many lives you endangered with your actions? Do you understand the magnitude of what you've done? Prompted by my words, those present began to voice their criticism towards him. Donald, looking pale and shrinking away, eventually broke down and apologized, but that couldn't erase the crime he committed. He admitted his guilt, faced disciplinary action, and was criminally charged, leading to his dismissal. His actions, both past and present, certainly cannot be forgiven. However, I couldn't help but feel pity for Donald, who had driven himself to this point by fixating on and trying to sabotage another person. A few days later, Susan and I went out for a meal together. Susan had invited me, asking, "Would you like to go out for a meal together on our next day off?" Being an excellent cabin attendant, Susan always looked dignified and beautiful, but in her casual clothes, she seemed even more so. I had secretly been attracted to her for a long time, but I had nearly given up on the idea, thinking that someone 8 years my junior could never be interested in me. However, our relationship rapidly grew closer following that incident. Could it be the suspension bridge effect? No, maybe it's slightly different. As I was eating, pondering over such thoughts. "Brian, you were really cool the other day," Susan said. I was at a loss for words, and Susan smiled softly. "What do you mean?" When there was trouble, you gave calm instructions, right? Thanks to you, I was able to act calmly too. It was wonderful. It was an embarrassing compliment, but I feel responsible for involving so many people in my problem with Donald. That humble side of you is also wonderful. Are you teasing me? Not at all. Susan covered her mouth with her hand and smiled gently. Her surprising statements didn't end there. I'm the type to make a move on someone I'm interested in, she said. I was stunned. I could feel my face turning red. Then, Susan and I started dating. We both travel a lot for work, in the sky or abroad, but she always wanted to go overseas even in her private time. I also love flying, so traveling together is a great joy. France, Canada, Vietnam, Hawaii. We've made many memories in various places with her. Each time, I felt the wounds in my heart healing. I'm planning to propose to her soon. I intend to invite Mr. Richard to our wedding. It must be the strange connection that he helped forge. That's what I felt.